Oh,
Welcome, Dr. Mandeville, to TED EDU webinar. I am your host, Dr. Layla Lohmann, a TED patient, a dentist, a wife, mother of 2 children. This webinar is produced by the TED Community Organization, and we'd like to thank our supporter and partner, Viridian Therapeutics, to make this happen. Dr. Mandeville is an ophthalmic plastic surgeon with a special interest in surgical and medical intervention treatment, with patients specifically living with thyroid eye disease. He has a very busy clinical practice in the Boston area, and he is a partner and past president of the Ophthalmic Consultants of Boston, which is a large private practice of nearly 70 eye care professionals. Dr. Mandeville has been interested in research since his first job in cancer research at the age of 16. He is trained at several prestigious universities, including MIT, Columbia, UCLA, and Harvard, which is an incredible amount of learning. He's participated in clinical trials as a medical student from one of our previous conversations, and he's recently been the principal investigator for multiple clinical trials focused on thyroid eye disease. Most importantly, him and his partner, Doug, are fur parents to a beautiful rescue dog named Willow. So welcome today, Dr. Mandeville. Today, we'll be discussing the basics of thyroid eye disease, TED, clinical trials, and answering the most common questions posed by those thyroid eye disease patients. We hope to provide clarity to the scope and the risks and benefits regarding clinical trials in the next 25 minutes. We want to give you some logistical details of clinical trials, enabling you to make informed decisions about your participation in them or future participations. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Mandeville.
well,
Can you tell me? Oh, you're
yeah.
welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, other than all the amazing things that I said, and what really sparked your interest with working with thyroid eye disease patients?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been in laboratories and doing research since my first summer job when I was 16. And I've always thought I was going to be a clinician scientist. I have a PhD as well. And when I got into practicing ophthalmology, I was just so busy, there just really wasn't time for it. And now that I'm a little more senior, I found a way back into that with clinical trials. I know how important the development of new drugs is, especially with the new treatments available for thyroid eye disease. And I'm excited to be part of the whole research process and bringing these things and giving my patients access to these new treatments.
That's incredible. How long have you been serving as principal investigator in clinical trials? And can you explain to our viewers what is a principal investigator?
Sure. So I'm actually relatively new to this process. So I've only been doing these for the last year. So all of this is fresh in my mind. So the principal investigator is the basically the one who's in charge and responsible for all the clinical activities that happen at a particular site. So, and we can talk about, how clinical trials are structured. But most of the trials that our viewers would be participating in would be multi-center trials that happen in different locations, and each location has sort of the chief that in charge of that. So for me, that means I just do whatever I'm told from my research director, but you're ultimately responsible for the medical care of the patients, making sure everything is done by the book. Clinical research, it's very important that all these rules, international rules and FDA rules, are followed. And if anything goes wrong, you're the person who's responsible. So that's the principal investigator is responsible for conducting the research, having backups, and managing the whole research staff at each facility.
Are you the only physician as a principal investigator and the rest supportive roles, or are there other physicians on the similar level as you?
So there's really one principal investigator. That's why it's called the principal for each location. But each position we have has a backup. So let's say I got sick. So we do have what we call a sub-investigator. So your sub-I is another physician in the practice who can jump in and take over in an emergency. But most of these trials is very important that the research be conducted or the measurements and exams be conducted by the same person to keep consistency over time and over different patients. So really there's basically one principal investigator per site. So if a clinical trial has 80 sites, there's probably 80 principal investigators.
Okay, that's interesting. So now that we understand what your role is, can you tell us what the purpose of a clinical trial would be?
So clinical trials are the way that we bring new drugs to market in the US. So clinical trials can involve drugs. They can also involve techniques. They can involve new uses of drugs, a drug that was used for something else, or a new way to use an old drug and using it in a new way. So this is part of the FDA drug approval process. So clinical trials are important because they standardize things. So it's not you're not just bringing a drug and saying, I think this would work. You're actually testing it. Um, there's placebos, so we can see whether a drug is better than placebo. Does it actually work? You're doing it at multiple sites, and there's a very, very organized and rigorous process that these things have to go through before they get approved. So the clinical trial is really how we get new drugs and new treatments.
Okay, so now that we know what clinical trials are in your role, can you explain what the phases in clinical trials mean?
Yeah, this is very it's sort of murky, but it's a very progressive. So I like to say there's 5 phases actually. There's 0 through 4. So phase 0 really is the bench work. So you're doing like test tubes and working on like mice and animal models to find something that you think might work. Phase 1 is really just testing, usually on healthy volunteers, to see what dose of the drug is safe. So you try a 10, 20, 40 milligram and see which drug is how well the drug is tolerated and whether there's any side effects from it. Then phase 2 is when you actually start testing on patients with the disease or the problem that you're trying to treat. So for TED, for thyroid eye disease, phase 2 would be involving thyroid eye disease patients and just seeing you'd have a small group, small panel of patients to make sure it's safe and make sure it actually is doing something for those phase 2 patients.
Mhm.
If it makes past phase 2, you go to phase 3. And phase 3 is a bigger study, and now you're actually doing some patients get the placebo, some patients get the drug. There may be different arms. And this is the big trial generally. And this is the most important one for FDA approval. So only a small number of drugs make it from phase 2 to phase 3, and then only a small number make it through phase 3. So if a phase 3 trial shows that, boy, this drug actually works for this disease, it may be cheaper, it may work better, it may have different side effects, then the pharmaceutical company can submit that data to the FDA for approval. Once the drug's approved and it's actually on the market, some drugs will undergo a phase 4 study. And a phase 4 study is when you actually compare, does A work better than B, or is it cheaper, or does it last longer, or just you look at for side effects. Maybe you don't notice any side effects when you give it to 200 people, maybe you can give it to 2,000, you start to see side effects. So
Yeah.
that's phase 4.
What's phase
So
five?
phase 5, I don't know. Maybe that's on the moon. We'll find out.
Yeah, that's good. No, I mean, understandable. And I think it's a unique, um, I mean, I didn't understand clinical trials until I got a biologic for the medication that I took. And I was just glad that got through what it did. And then so I'm so glad that there's more clinical trials available for TED patients. Speaking of that, what are some typical eligibility criteria for participation in TED trials?
Yes. So all clinical trials have what they call inclusion and exclusion criteria. So, and this is important so that when you're actually comparing things, you're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So inclusion criteria for TED specifically, usually you have to have a certain age range. That you have to be able to consent, understand what is involved in the trial. You have to have disease that's measurable. So usually in thyroid eye disease, that's bulging of the eyes. That's an easy thing to measure. But there may be other things you're measuring too. You have your activity scores, your swelling, your redness. There's other things that you can measure. So depending on the trial, they may be looking for patients who are new and active, or they could be looking for patients with chronic disease. So you have to have those. You have to be interested in participating in the trial, of course. So once you get all the information, you have to decide whether you're going to want to go ahead with it. There may be other criteria if you're in reproductive age. So if they're possibly children, you maybe have to be willing to use contraception because you don't know what a drug might do. If you had a pregnancy. So those are the types of inclusion criteria. And then the exclusion criteria are things that would rule you out. So you may be very interested in the study and you may have really bulgy eyes, but if you have one of the exclusion criteria, then you won't qualify.
Yeah.
So for example, you wouldn't qualify for the several these drugs have side effects where you cause hearing loss. So hearing loss made exclusion or out of control diabetes or inflammatory bowel disease might rule you out. Or if you have pre-existing problems. Sometimes having been involved in one drug study prevents you from future ones. So if you already had a drug in that class, maybe you can never, be in a trial in that class, but maybe you could try something else.
Yeah.
Um, so those are the types of criteria, or having other like background diseases that could be activated.
Can you tell me why someone healthy would like to participate in clinical trials?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, as we discussed previously, so I actually was in medical school and I wanted to get involved in a clinical trial, and there's pluses and minuses to doing that for people. So as a healthy person, I was involved in a phase 1 clinical trial for a cholesterol drug actually, and it involved 6 months of controlled diet followed by taking the medication and then drinking a radioactive milkshake, and seeing how that affected your absorption of cholesterol. So healthy people can benefit. There are different benefits for a healthy person. So it could be monetary, maybe they give you some reimbursement, or in my case, my study, I got 6 months of free food. So that was really great when I was, 25 years old or 22 years old. Um, and also if you have like a sense that you want to help patients and move science forward. So phase 1 trials might be appealing to, you know, your friends and family who you may not have TED but want to support you.
No, I love that. Speaking of commitments and participation in these types of trials, what are some typical requirements or commitments for participation, such as visit frequencies, medications, testing? What's a typical one look like for a TED patient?
Yeah, so these drugs typically are administered as a series. It's not one-time treatment. Typically, you get maybe 5 or more treatments. So if that treatment is an infusion, and most of the drugs so far have been infusions, you would need to come in every 2 weeks or 3 weeks for a treatment. At that treatment, you can expect to be in the office or in the treatment center for several hours because you have to be tested beforehand. In a clinical trial, you're monitored very closely. So every visit you get blood tests and hearing tests and physical exam and eye exam. So you're watched like a hawk, and you get your treatment, and then you have to be monitored after the treatment to make sure you're doing okay. So there's several, let's say on average 5, 6 treatments, and then we monitor you for maybe 6 months afterwards, just to make sure there's no side effects or late side effects that might come up later on. We want to see if you had a good response. Does the response stay or does it go away after you stop the drug?
Yeah.
So it's a pretty big commitment, I would say. So
But it sounds like it's a for somebody who's living with that disease, could be a potential benefit being seen that frequently and participating in a trial because that's constant care that most people don't get. So would you consider that a benefit of those types of trials?
absolutely. So when I talk to my patients, I have a large patient panel. They sort of run the gamut from like, hey, I want to try anything, give it to me now, to like, I don't know, I want to make sure it's safe. So I tell people who are nervous about it, I think in terms of what's in it for you to do a clinical trial. So I absolutely say that's a benefit. If you're nervous, you're never going to be watched more closely than in one of these drug trials. So you're every 3 weeks, I'm going to be checking your hearing. And if you burp too much or whatever, you're going to call me. If your fingernails change color, you're going to call me. So you have constant attention. Whereas if you're getting an established drug, you're only getting seen maybe once or twice during the treatment, usually. And you're not monitored. You're not getting an EKG every time. You're not getting a
Yeah.
hearing test every time, you know. So that is a plus.
It's a
Uh,
concierge type of care with
it is.
also furthering science with the condition that you are currently living with, which I find unique because I am ineligible for any clinical trials because I've had a biologic. So that's the reason I was just asking, because it's a really unique perspective. In your experience, what is some potential risks of participating in trials?
Right. So the risk, obviously, you're getting a drug that's not FDA approved yet. Hopefully it will be. So the risks, you may be getting a drug that has side effects. And we may not know. Patients say, "What are the side effects of the drug?" I'm like, "Well, we don't know. That's why we're doing the clinical trial." So there is some risk there. Hopefully, we catch it early enough. Most side effects are not permanent. They do go away. But sometimes you might need treatment for that. If your blood sugar goes out of control, you might need to be put on insulin or, something like that. So that's a risk. There's a risk of long-term side effects you may not know about. So maybe 5 years from now, it may increase the risk of something or other. So we don't really know those. There's a risk of, spending a lot of time and you may have gotten the placebo. So if you got the placebo, most pharmaceutical companies will say if you did not have an improvement in your proptosis and your bulging of your eyes, at the end of the trial, most of them will put you on what's called an open label extension. So what
Mhm.
that means is if you got placebo or even if you got the drug and it didn't work, then what they'll do is they will unmask the trial. And we haven't talked about masking, but then they'll give you the actual drug and say, okay, now you're actually getting the drug. And then you start the trial again, but now you're actually getting the real thing. Um,
Sure.
so you get it.
Um, just, full disclosure, I'm 4 years into having my own medication journey with thyroid eye disease. And to your point, I believe that my medication did cause to have IBD. I've just been diagnosed with it. And again, just for our viewers, we get to decide that. It's our choice to take these medications to have a different quality of life, and there's risks involved with all of them. So to your point, whether or not you do a clinical trial or not, even if you get the medication once approved, it's still benefits and risks. So I just wanted to say to our amazing viewers that those are all choices we get to make with our professionals, making sure we're doing it in the most guided way possible. But to living with thyroid eye disease, to living with IBD now, I get to decide that I don't have as much pain in my eyes versus what else happens. So I appreciate your candidness about clinical trials, but I just wanted to give our viewers just a perspective of even if you did the clinical trials, the medications also have side effects.
Yeah, so I tell my patients that they always say, "Well, I don't want to do use anything that has side effects." And there's not a single surgery that doesn't have a side effect. There's not a single drug that doesn't have a side effect. Aspirin has, can cause
Yeah.
pain, can cause, ulcers. Everything has a side effect. So it's a risk benefit ratio for you as a patient. So if you have no symptoms and you're feeling just fine, and maybe you don't need to do it. And then in
Yeah.
that case, the risks outweigh the benefits. But if you're
Yeah.
symptomatic, that calculus may change.
I love that. I have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
What would you do if a participant in a clinical trial would like to drop out for any reason?
So I have experienced this. So you as a trial participant are in complete control at all times. So you are never going to be forced to continue. If for whatever reason, it could be, your spouse is sick, it could be you don't like coming in to the office or whatever it is, you can pull out at any time. Um, we usually ask that if you are pulling out, you may not be willing to get the drug anymore, but you may be willing to come in for just monitoring. There's different levels of pulling out,
Yeah.
but you can absolutely pull out any time. And I always tell patients, if you're a participant in a drug trial, they say, "Well, am I a guinea pig?" It's like I say, "You're not a guinea pig. You're a VIP." When you come into our office, they scoot you to the front of the line. You get this swarm of people who are, helping you and managing your care. So you're really the VIP.
Yeah.
And I should mention also that you are reimbursed for your time to some degree. You're not going to get rich by participating in a clinical trial, but you are compensated for your time. So there is a little bit of incentive that way. And I should also say the VIP treatment. So let's say I've had patients who I practice in Boston. I've had patients who are in, Pennsylvania or Maryland, and they fly up to see me. And so all of that's taken care of. So you don't really have any expenses to worry about from that standpoint. They'll put you up in a hotel or, get an Uber if you want. So you're really a VIP.
Yeah, no, I love that because what you're saying is that, we need to further science. There's awareness about diseases now, and now there's pharma companies that want to help these patients, and they want to remove any barriers or restrictions that would stop someone from joining a clinical trial. And I think that's so helpful for those patients who may not have the resources to be able to do that. So if that's all covered by the clinical trial, does insurance cover any of it, or is this completely separate from commercial insurance?
So this is completely separate. So if you have a problem during the clinical trial, let's say you have a hearing issue, usually the pharmaceutical company will take over, and manage some of that care for the complication as well. But yeah, this is completely separate from insurance, and for some patients that's a benefit. I had a couple patients who couldn't get on our, existing drugs, and the insurance company denied it. So, but they were able to get on the clinical trial. So it may be that being be another way of sort of getting around your insurance
Yeah,
company.
yeah. What happens at the end of a trial? Is there support for these participants? What's next?
So with the clinical trial, you don't know if you're getting drug or placebo. I don't know if you're getting drug or placebo, and it may be a year before they quote unmask the study. So you will probably find out at the end of that time period whether you actually got the drug or not. So you have to be able to live with, the question. And if you have a complication, you certainly are going to be managed by a medical team, be it your own or through us. And you will uh, report back to us at least till the end of the trial, maybe up to a year afterwards. We'll still have visits and check your results. Um, but pretty much after that, you're hopefully good to go.
Yeah. Well, and for our viewers, the other support is our thyroid eye disease community to help you beyond that. But one last question, because it's very hard to find professionals such as yourself who empathize with people living with thyroid eye disease, and most professionals minimize or don't have enough patience for us to understand the disease. So, how would our viewers who potentially are lost or would love to know more about this be able to contact you?
So, well, I'm not saying me in particular, but someone like me, I would say, you can ask your eye care provider. I, as an oculoplastic surgeon,
Yeah.
this is sort of my wheelhouse. I'm very comfortable in this space. But not all oculoplastic surgeons will, treat thyroid eye disease. So the best thing to do is, ask your eye care professional, like who would you send to, who would you send your parents to? And you can ask endocrinologists, are also good resources. I'm happy to see anyone who's in the Boston area, of course. Our website is iboston.com, and you can certainly find us that way. But it's a small but very dedicated community who's willing to treat this disease because, as you mentioned, it's a tough disease. It can, impact your appearance, your quality of life, your health. So it's complicated. So you don't want to just go to anybody.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I can't thank you enough for spending this time with us, Dr. Mandeville. It's truly an honor to partner with people like you in bringing awareness and furthering technology innovations through clinical trials to help us have a better quality of life in our future and our kids' future. I appreciate the great work. And on behalf of everyone who is affected with thyroid eye disease, thank you very much. Please visit tedcommunity.org to learn more about TED Community Organization and how to participate in our amazing list of free services available to you. Thank you, Dr. Mandeville. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was fun. I enjoyed being here, and good luck to all your community out there.
And I would like to thank our partner, Viridian Therapeutics, again for making this happen. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.